Everybody, welcome to week 261. Yes, 261. And just so you know, we will re-emphasize this later on for anybody coming on late, but we're going to be gone next week because guess what? Independence Day, the 4th of July, people are going to be taking off. We're going to be taking off. We do a thank you week for our employees. So we shut down the office next week, which is going to be well deserved for all of us and our employees. So anyway, um, you know, come and join us for week 262 in 2 weeks. So next week is week 1776.
Oh,
Next
now
year will be the
you really threw Adam
250th.
off. Now Adam's
Yeah,
all
I
totally
know.
confused.
It's always a bajillion to him.
A whole lot.
And it was his idea to get this thing started, which thank you, Adam. We appreciate it. Oh, by the way, I know we're going to be talking about employee and partner theft. And unfortunately, we all have experience, and I have firsthand experience with it. It's not fun. But hopefully, we'll be able to save somebody else from going through it, or if you are going through it, or you need to see that maybe it's happening and you don't even know it. I'm hoping that this one will help. But I think also just for some future ones, I had a really interesting conversation on AI with another guest on our podcast, the Anything But Typical podcast, um, and how they are using it for some of their accounting firm or their businesses in their QuickBooks. Like, ooh, that's kind of an interesting thing. So I want to go deeper on that because I think there's going to be another layer of making AI work because there's been so much information and like interest in that. So we may be teeing that up at some point too. So before we go into this week's topic, you guys know the drill. Hit us in the chat for harassment, um, and hit us in the Q&A if you got questions. Any current event things that we need to talk about before we launch into this, Adam and Jack?
I think that the only things that and we had just mentioned that interest rates stayed the same, but that's kind of last week's news. I don't know if there's any indication as to, and obviously there continues to be a dispute as to whether or not there needs to be an adjustment or not. And so I think it's kind of like a wait and see, that remains a wait and see approach. We could talk a little bit about the war that is not a war, that with the bunker bomb busters and things like that, but that I think is still kind of a really hot political issue as to whether it was successful, not successful, whether it was authorized, not authorized, those kind of things. But I will say that I do appreciate the commentary on both sides, that of the aisle, that and a tribute to the men and women that um, flew the mission and were part of logistics and everything else. I mean, I can only imagine what it would feel like to not be able to communicate and fly 7 hours across the world, and then come back home. And they were showing videos of the families who didn't know what was going on. I guess they left on Friday, right? And then on the news on Saturday, these families then realized what was going on and then waited until Sunday for their, fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, et cetera, to come home and land back into the US. So, kudos to them, and my thanks to anyone who has served or is serving.
Joseph did do a quick correction. You said 7 hours. He said 36 hours. He jumped on that like white on rice, man. So I've got a friend whose son-in-law is a B-2 pilot. So I sent a note to her and I said, "Hey, was your son on one of those missions?" And she said, "No, he is actually in like he's not retired, but like he's not active on it, but all of his buddies, his buddies were in it. So very interesting out of Missouri." I mean, you think about it, that like real quick, that is just an amazing thing to have no radar footprint bigger than a bird when that thing is so massive. Oh, holy moly. Pretty incredible. Go ahead, Adam.
Um, so the only thing I'd pop in on is the big beautiful bill and whether it'll pass by the 4th, which was a somewhat arbitrary day to pick, and it's coming up pretty fast. That's a hard call, just because the differences are so massive between the Senate and the House. So you got the Senate saying, well, we can't vote for it in its current path, and some people have real problems with it, including our own Senator Tom Tillis. And then the House people say, well, we're not going to vote with this. The House people are saying, well, we're not going to vote for what the Senate people are proposing. So it is turning into a lot of back and forth, but it really seems to come down to two primary issues. Issue number one is that part of the House, like, in other words, there's a whole bunch of stuff that people agree to, which is keep the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act intact.
Yeah.
So had it just not been a big, beautiful bill and just said, hey, let's just do that, we wouldn't even be having this debate, Gary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
But
wish we weren't
yeah,
having this
but
debate.
but instead, they're trying to do some other stuff too at the same time. And, kind of the two big problem areas appear to be, hey, a way that we're gonna pay for this is we're gonna reduce spending. And one broad category of spending that they propose to reduce would force states like North Carolina to make up the gap, because these are people that would still qualify for spending, like funding for a rural hospital as an example. Um, Somebody's got to, if we believe that that is a societal good, someone has to pay for it. And this just transfers the price from the federal government to the state government, which, you can kind of make an argument, states' rights, sir. If you want to have a rural hospital, then you can have one and you pay for it. But you kind of get like, I mean, I can't really understand why. I don't know enough about rural hospitals in North Carolina to speak adequately on the topic, but like Josh Hawley, from Missouri, which Missouri is close enough to Oklahoma to know this, and you would know from Kansas, like rural
Yeah.
hospitals are a big freaking deal. Like
Yeah.
there's, little towns in the middle of the country are not the same as the little towns here. Like little towns here means I'm 30 minutes from Raleigh.
Right.
Not so bad. Little town in rural Oklahoma, I'm hours, from a hospital that has the ability to service me, if I close the local one down in a lot of respects. So I kind of understand their point there. And then I think the other area is, hey, you're just not cutting other spending enough. And it's like you got one group that's saying, hey, that's interesting that we're trying to cut these tax credits for energy incentives, but we have constituents who've already, because a lot of the energy related incentives went to Republican districts. We got people who are spending money, already, based on these credits coming. So it's just, you know, it's turned into the complicated negotiating process that something this large was invariably going to turn into. That's basically just a discussion around who are we going to piss off the least. you know, at the end of the day, who are we going to piss off the least? Which is why this is such a difficult problem to resolve. And probably what'll happen is that our taxes will go up at some point in the future to pay for all this. So anyway, mic drop done. But that's a long way of saying, if I was a betting man, I would bet on either last minute compromise, or I would bet on start over and just go with the tax policy to get something done by the end of the year. But I just don't see a scenario where the tax policy isn't going to go. Like that would be devastating. I mean, that would be devastating to a lot of people in a lot of respects, whether it's the right answer or not. Nobody's prepared to pay a whole lot more in taxes right now. And secondly, it's like you actually had a bunch of Democrats who agreed with making the tax policy permanent. They just wanted some ceilings. so like, so like that just Jack, where I'm from, that feels like a win. Like we don't feel a whole lot apart if we can focus on that. So anyway, I'll shut up now. That's enough out of me.
Well, here's the question. So if it doesn't happen, everybody can move to New York City because you're going to have free everything based on this mayoral. Like, holy moly, there's some crazy stuff going on there, but everything will be free. So, let's see how that works. Hey, speaking of free, um, I guess there's no such thing as a free lunch unless you're taking money out of the till. It's free to you, but somebody's paying for it. So, one thing that I want to do before Adam has to pop off um, a little bit early today is I'd like to talk about some of the things, and then Jack and you and I have some stories that we can talk about on the back end of this thing that I know that we can cover and we need to cover. But with regard to employee or partner theft that happens, and it's not the ski mask, stick them up. It's quiet little things, and it's somebody that's smiling to your face. And as the OJ said, the backstabbers. So my question to you, Adam, because we've seen this with clients, with prospects that came to us because this happened. Usually it was a controller, it was somebody that had access to the purse strings, and usually it starts a little small, but and the really good ones, they can hide it extremely well. Um, if you're a business owner or a leader listening to this thing and you're kind of freaked out about the prospect of it, and then you start going, man, can I trust anybody? What are some of the things that you've seen where they can be remedied, first of all, for looking and finding? And we're not forensic accountants. Let's just make that clear. Um, if you guys need a forensic accountant, we've got resources for you. But that's not our bread and butter. But we've seen the issue. What are some of the things like to be looking for, and what are some of the best safeguards that you've seen to help prevent the temptation or at least thwart it so that it doesn't happen?
Yeah, good question, Gary, because there's the balancing act between, and some of what I'm going to talk about also can bleed into what you see in partnerships as well. It's just the setup is a little bit different in the partnership, but the underlying thing is typically the same. So, um, you're the CEO, you don't want to be in the weeds, you want to empower people, at the same time, it is kind of a high degree of trust. And like the thing that, when you go to bed at night, it's like, do you really believe that everything's going according to plan and you're not being stolen from, or do you just have your head in the sand and just hoping that it's all right? It's hard to say
Yeah.
what's the true answer. So you kind of teed it up well. Typically, if you think about, well, what's the psychographic of the usual circumstance? It is the uh employee who believes that they are entitled to more than what you're paying them. So, hey, I'll just sort of make this right myself, you know. And it's hard to it's hard to gauge that. But like if I was thinking about, well, how would that typically show up? It would show up, you know, hey Jack, I wanted to do your annual performance evaluation. Really love you, appreciate everything that you're doing. Um, and here's your 2% raise this year. And the company did really well. Or hey Jack, that's really cool salary information that you gave me. Um, about how you should get paid more. But we just can't afford that. So here's your 2% raise. Um, by the way, have you seen my new G-Wagon? It's awesome. Yeah. Like,
I'll take you to lunch. You
yeah,
can buy.
yeah, and by the way, go ahead and put that trip to Disneyland through. We're gonna call that the annual meeting expense. So, the Jack of the world starts to feel a sense of like, well, this is a bunch of BS, So they just because they don't feel like they're being treated fairly. So you're right, Gary. It kind of starts small. Maybe I start using the company credit card for some of my meals, or some of my purchases, or I make a couple Amazon purchases, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, that went well. And then it just starts to escalate and escalate and escalate usually. Like very, very rarely does it just stay at the Superman 3 level, of just, pennies, over time. Usually it escalates up into eventually, hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes a year. And you're like, well, what'd you spend? And they never, there's never like a mystery bank account where you can recover the funds from. It's they blew the money. Because and that's why they needed to keep on taking more and more and more. Like very rarely does somebody say, I'm going to use the company credit card to buy something from Target so then I can return it. Ask for cash back. I'm going to deposit that in a bank account, save it, and let it earn 8%. Is not the typical embezzlement scenario. So that and again, there's lots of little ways that people can steal, lying about mileage reports and stuff like that. We're not talking about those. We're talking about like live cash, that people are stealing. But it usually starts with a sense of entitlement on the part of the person. So if I think about what are some really good preventative measures on that, it's funny. A lot of it actually is culture, in the sense of like, don't give them a reason to feel entitled in the first place. Meaning like, you know, am I doing some sort of employee morale survey and kind of gauging generally where people's heads at, in terms of engagement? Because people are typically not going to steal from a company that they feel extremely, in other words, like they may say that they're loyal, but at the same time they're stealing from you. But typically somebody who's like bleeding the colors of the company is not going to steal from you. So employee engagement's one, continually doing some employee, doing some salary band surveys. Um, or is another good practice to make sure that you're paying people fairly instead of just doing the cost of living increase. Um, doing performance evaluations frequently, so like it's kind of embedded into, hey, we're keeping a pulse on performance so that nobody's really surprised about compensation. Those are all good ones, just to make sure that you don't have like a secret buildup of entitled uh an entitled person sitting there. But let's say that you don't do anything about that and it's actually happening anyway. Um, Honestly, the best this doesn't prevent it in the first place, but it at least allows you to spot it without years going by, is just suck it up and maybe once or twice a year going through your general ledger categories and looking at like specific line items to say, do I even know what the hell that is? Because I mean, you can't, like, I get that, oh, you don't understand, Gary. I'm $100 million company. How can I possibly go through it? You're right. But at the same time, if you rule out payroll, you don't need to look at that really for this purpose. If you rule, well, rent is rent, you can kind of rule that out. You don't need to be inspecting the Duke Energy bill. You're really isolating it down to like office supplies, meals and entertainment, what activity was going on in the company, credit cards. Does that seem like something that we would have done? And just start asking questions. And if you did that twice a year, you pretty well A, catch anything that's going to happen, and B, put people on notice that shit's going down. Like somebody like Boss Man's got eyes on this.
Yeah.
You're at least letting them know that you're not, you don't have your head buried in the sand, like an ostrich.
Yeah. After you leave, my story, but we'll talk about that because those were areas that I missed with my partner until I didn't miss them. But yeah, I think that's really good. I really appreciate you dealing with the entitlement uh, mentality because that's where it starts, man. It starts with this slippery slope, and we talk a lot about mindset, um, especially on our podcast, because it matters and it just matters. But you still can't control what somebody else is going to do. But like I like that control that you're putting on there. Um, Jack, you've seen this. You've done lots and lots and lots and lots of deals, and probably have seen as even part of due diligence it uncovering things like whoops. I would imagine. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd love your perspective.
Yeah, and speaking of mindset, so I put the on my green screen, Gollum, and you can't see it, but it says they stole it. They stole. I can't even do the voice. They stole it from us, but and
Ambitious.
there you go, there you go. See,
That's
it
good.
just took a little bit of encouragement to
You
do
know it's
that.
coming out.
Yes, of course. So I agree with with Adam in talking about culture, that you build a culture that is not wanting to do things that are bad or incorrect for the business. Now you balance that, or the counterweight of that is when you feel good about the company, but you feel like maybe they're not doing what they can, and then you see other things going on. For example, the reimbursement for the trip or the new vehicle or whatever it may be. So I a couple of thoughts on that, which is that you don't want to lock things down so that there is this air of distrust with your employees, but at the same time you need to make sure that there are these controls in place on the front end and throughout, meaning on the front end that your employment agreements discuss policies and procedures, that you have an employee manual that discusses these things, that you go through and you do. I have various lists that I've compiled on most common types of employee theft, of ownership theft. So, and focusing on the monetary ones, you talk about, okay, cash theft, which is more for retail type businesses where it's, here's one for the till, here's two for me, kind of thing. The payroll fraud issues, and that's more along the lines of saying that you worked, or that someone worked for 37 hours and they really weren't working. This has become more of a problem, a challenge with the whole work from home. And, it's one of those things where you have to have trust in the people that you're allowing to do that and have various controls. The extreme of that was where you had companies that were monitoring your screens or monitoring your time, and you better not
Yeah.
have go from green to yellow to red on your your motions. There are people I know that got their mouses in a little device that just moves it around every once in a while. So you will never go to yellow or to red on someone else's screen in your Outlook. And so it's those kind of things that you want to monitor. You want to monitor, there's not just monetary theft, but there's asset theft of documentation, of formulas, of recipes, of financial data. So, creating barriers to those things. Expense reimbursement. Yeah, there was some tangential benefit to the company because I took out one of my buddies who, um, might bring business, so a sort of business development. So we're going to write off those tickets to the Panthers or whatever it may be. And then the opposite extreme of that is, and let me say that I understand you talk about entitlement, but then you also talk about trust. And I've said this before actually on air that there was more than one incident where our controller has said, all right, hey, I need more information about this. And I give her a printout of my credit card that has the details on it and has all the merchant codes and everything else. And she's like, yeah, but who are you with? Who? I said, you know what? I've been here long enough. This is what I say to myself. I've been here long enough. I should be trusted. And then I get upset in my head for about 30 seconds, but then I come to the realization, which is I would rather that our controller do that for everyone regardless of tenure, to make sure, because there are circumstances where, let's say you have someone who's been in for 20 years. I mean, use me as an example, 25 years. And I feel like that maybe I didn't get paid enough at the end of the year. So now I'm starting to adjust my income to where I think it should be via taking out my buddies, doing this, doing that. And so I'd rather somebody be watching over people who, all of us, because I know if I'm not doing anything wrong, there's nothing to fear. It might be a pain in the ass, but not really. I mean, just get that receipt that had, not just the one that you sign, but the one that shows, okay, the beverages, the food and everything else, and then show that it was legit and that you weren't taking friends out for a feast or anything. So it's those kind of, and that's the push and pull, which is the trust versus trust, but have controls in place for people who either intentionally make bad decisions because they want to steal from you or feel justified, entitled to do that. And there are people who you would not think would feel that way for whatever reason. Some other things on the list, interesting, vendor fraud, collusion. So you have someone who has the relationship as the gateway to vendors, either buying services, paying for services, goods, whatever it may be. And then, you start getting into a little kickback scenario, and money may be siphoned off, or it may be that the company is paying more for something, and then somehow some of that money ends up coming back to the person's personal bank account. So, being mindful of your telemetry in the business, dealing with payables, dealing with receivables, those kind of things, writing off things as bad debt or uncollectible when they actually have been collected. So there's those kind of things. There's some other, and like I said, data or intellectual property theft. Your one of your prime assets is the data that you have, the data that you've acquired. And so, again, you can't prevent it in all cases, but at least having the documentation so that you can use it as a hammer over someone else. And then kind of on the ownership side of things, I had pulled up a list, and things that you guys talk about, tax evasion. I mean, those kind of things where you start cooking the books on what you're reporting back to, to the IRS or to North Carolina Department of Revenue, misuse of company funds. We talked about payroll. And I mean, just manipulating business valuation for personal gain, which I think is also interesting. And the reason why I bring that up is because that I saw a valuation for a business that our client was intending on buying. And I didn't know much about that industry or that business, but but it wasn't kind of asset intensive. there wasn't long-term contracts, but yet this company was valued very high. And I thought, well, where is the value? It must be in the goodwill of the business. And then as it turns out, yeah, maybe, but not really. So I was like, all right, but they had a valuation that was done. And then so everybody kind of thought, well, this must be true. And I won't say who the valuation company was, not from in this state. So no one that you may know locally.
That's good.
And yes, and so it's those kind of things. It's just being aware of your surroundings. And I go back to something that we've said kind of consistently and constantly over the course of time, which is know what's going on outside of your office door. Walk amongst the troops, get yourself immersed into the data. I understand, not your job necessarily. You hire people, you trust people, but every once in a while, you need to be the verifier. You need to be the secret shopper within your own company to go in and see what's going on, kind of very covertly, and sometimes very openly. There's the other part of this is to be very overt about what you're doing, what you're looking at, to make it harder. As Adam said a little while ago, it's done incrementally. It is let me test and see this and see if anybody notices, and then let me see this, and then it's okay, well, I can get away with the next level as long as I maybe manipulate the receipts and the invoices. So now there's missing data, or why is it that this is an estimate, or all this is grouped together into one transaction when there was money flowing in and out in multiple transactions that should have been recorded separately on a general ledger. So it's those kind of things that you're looking for. But again, back to Adam's comment, it's a lot of times it's incremental, and people will feel more confident once they get away with the little bites, and then it'll get bigger and bigger and bigger. We had a client who trusted their CFO. I'll tell you two more stories, and I'll stop. One is
wait, hold on.
Yes.
Save it, because I want to hit Adam before he's got to
Yes.
go, and then we'll come back to that. Okay. So
Okay.
Adam, two questions. First one is, what's probably the most frequent and easy to spot thing that you've seen across friends, company owners that have come to us or that have had it happen to them? The easiest and most frequent thing that you've seen, and then if you have time, the craziest one that you've seen.
I'll also hit Joe's chat question. The most common is this baby. Like Jack said, the use of the old company credit card, and you just ask yourself, like, why would this person have so many lunches? Why would we ever go to Target? And I mean, that's as simple as just look at the damn credit card statement.
Yeah.
That honestly is the most common, is just the little use of the credit card over and over again. You know, there's probably the craziest, Jack kind of hit on it, is like going through the process of actually just setting up fake employees and paying them. I mean, that's a lot of work.
Wow.
That it's right up there with setting up fake companies as a new vendor and paying them. Like, it's just like, that's you're start, in other words, like, the I don't know about you guys, but I love myself a little 48 hours. Right. So it's like I watch that to know, like, okay, if I'm gonna kill somebody, Jack, I need to know all the stuff, about how to do it. Right. So the credit card is the equivalent of, I drove with my cell phone to the murder.
Yeah.
The setting up of the employee is, no, I actually figured out a way to have my cell phone ping a tower in a way that could not possibly be traced to this location. I used a completely different car, blah, 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 all the stuff, right? And damn it, that Home Depot checkout camera that I didn't catch. You know, like you thought you did all the stuff, you know, and you just, you know, you missed one little item, you know, in it.
Yeah, that's really good. Both of those are really good. Um, all right, thank you. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I don't I know you need to go.
Yeah.
So but deal with
Well,
Papa Joe's deal here too.
yeah. So with Joe's thing, you know, that he's right. It does get kind of tough. And I think, you know, that there's all sorts of you know, I don't want people knowing that. I want to be secret about it and stuff like that. And I think, you know, I think the misperception that a lot of people have about business owners is that the employees always think you make a lot more than you actually do, you know, when you're starting. So
Yeah.
like that's one common misperception. The other common misperception is like from the owner's perspective is like, you know, actually a lot of the employees actually do want you to do well, you know, and that kind of gets back to the culture. So I really feel like that comes down to I think I think I think you can have the accoutrements that come along with business ownership, but it does get back to but you got to have a tight pulse on the entitlement, you know, culture and be like in other words, you can do that, but it's got to be coupled with, you know, you don't necessarily have to have an open compensation system, but you got to be very clear about how Jack can get from point A to point B at your company and what is progress on so that you're constantly remember like so Jack knows that he's being treated fairly. Like I'm not going to find it any better anywhere else than
Yeah.
what I have here. If you can get that culture, then the beach house doesn't matter as much. If you've got you know, if Jack feels like Bob freaking Cratchit, you know,
Yeah.
you're gonna have some real problems.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the most egregious ones that I've seen were where the founder and the president have marked parking spaces right next to the front door. And
I
and
mean, that's ridiculous, you know.
visitors maybe a couple away, and then everybody else back of the lot, you know.
In your matching Tesla, you know, like
Yeah, 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 exactly. I mean,
yeah,
it, yeah, so
And there's a
yeah,
lot of bipolar thoughts about that. And let me give you an example, which is, all right, for me, there have been times where I think about these things and I think about, you know, and I say this with all modesty, my professional success. But I also know I've worked my ass off for it. I also
right,
know the sacrifices that I've made that other people do not see. And so, yeah, sometimes the thought fires, well, you know, I went to law school, I put in my dues as an associate, did all these things. If you wanted to have this stuff, then you should have gone to law school, paid your dues,
right.
etc. But I also understand and appreciate not everyone has that opportunity or had that opportunity. So yeah, it's a matter of how you do things. You do things with modesty, as an owner, and it's okay. You know, it's I think showing, like, if you have had the thought ever had the thought that you were a narcissist, but then you also had the thought that you worry about what other people think about the way that you conduct yourself. Meaning, are you out there saying there's a difference between saying, for example, oh yeah, I own this house, this mega house out in Charleston, versus saying, yeah, there's a place we like to go out in Charleston as a family, you know? And so it's the way you say things, the way you present
Yeah,
things. And I think that again, that is part of the culture that you create. And there's always going to be people who are envious and jealous,
yeah,
and people who feel like, on one end, and then others who feel like they've been taken advantage of, that they are victims of life. And so they are entitled to, and you are just another person who's taken advantage of them because they are the forever eternal victim of the world of society. So well, we're
Yeah.
getting very philosophical, or at least I am.
Yeah. No, but I mean, if you think about that, like, I don't, I wouldn't, and Gary, don't get mad at me when I say this. I don't get the sense that Warren Buffett has to worry a lot about being stolen from. If I'm Elon Musk, I'm watching the credit card receipts. Both I think expect high performance. They just both have two
Yeah.
completely
Yeah.
different styles that they go about doing it. So like I could see myself working for Elon Musk and you know him telling me what a piece of shit I was, that I didn't deserve the blah blah, and maybe rightfully so. But I'm leaving in tears as he's flying off in his private jet saying, I'll show him.
Right.
Whereas, Warren Buffett showing up with his Egg McMuffin and his
Yeah.
Diet Coke, how was your day today, Jack?
Yeah.
It's just, I'm not stealing from that guy. you
Yeah.
know.
No, well, you bring up a great point. I actually know a guy that was an engineer that ran the Model 3 plant for Elon. And, and and he survived about 3 years doing it. And I said, "What was that like?" And he goes, "Man, tethered 24/7. Like, no kidding. I'd leave the plant at 2 in the morning and I'd be getting a call from Elon. He's up." And I'd already been working 14-hour days, like crazy. But let's also call a spade a spade. I'm not defending the dude's on the spectrum, like he's brilliant, but his people skills pretty low, so um but you bring up a great point, like, but you got to be who you're going to be. It's still somebody's prerogative to be entitled, and if they're a victim, beware. If you're hiring a victim, you may be hiring, a problem, and you just better have some controls in place. Um, we had a client that came to us from another CPA firm because the CPA firm was conflicted out because their controller for this client had been caught embezzling from another client of this CPA firm. And he's like, "Hey man, as a partner, a senior partner that called me and is like, I wish I had a better referral for you because I'd sent them some stuff that wasn't the right fit for us." And he's like, "This one has some hair on it." I'm like, "Well, does the does the CEO know about this?" "Yes, they have good controls in place." And I'm like, "Oh man." And yeah, there was hair on it. And the owner, he's challenging in some ways, but they had things in place, and they had good controls in place, which made it good. And I think that would be another thing that I would say is part of those controls. If your CPA firm tells you, "Hey," let's say partners, there are really no controls. The finance partner has all the control, and the other partner that's not paying attention to that because they like the production part or they like something else part of the business. That's where I was, and I got caught with my pants down because I wasn't paying attention to that stuff. And my partner, who nice guy. I mean, he was more like Warren Buffett than Elon Musk. He was a father figure to me. He would, and it was a line item. I could have, and it was that's when I caught it, and it was on the balance sheet. It was under consultants other. It was a big number. Like, whoa. And it was we were doing a due diligence because we were looking at doing a strategic alliance with a European firm. And so we brought in a valuation firm that had got me placed there initially. And they're like, "Man, all your books are like, everything is so clean. It's an incredible turnaround story. The only thing that's a little bit out of whack is this one line item." I wasn't paying attention. Boom, consultants other. And he was hiding money and passing it to his current wife, hiding it from his ex-wife and me. I just wasn't paying attention, and I felt really stupid. So I really like the practical aspect that you laid out, Adam, which is just go through the credit card statements and question these things. And if somebody like Jack, hey, it's legitimate, you're not going to be afraid about it. You may be annoyed, like, don't you trust me? But then you realize, wait a minute, especially if you've been burned, you're like, I'd much rather have you question me than to think that I'm above it. Like, because then all kinds of loosey-goosey stuff can be happening. But I also like the other thing is like go through the line items in your balance sheet and remove those big things, but then just go through, and if you don't understand it, admit it, like, and say, hey, help me understand. Because a lot of times people, we feel stupid because we should know this, but a lot of times we don't. Very few people actually go to school and do what Adam Boatman did, or in the law side, like what you did, Jack. Go to the experts, people that know that stuff, and admit if you don't. That's one of the most freeing things you can do. Admit that you don't know it.
Yeah,
You know?
I think it's turning over into partnerships the for Jack to bring us home. What I'll tee up with that uh is that that's a tougher one because like with partnerships, I think the more common scenario that I see is that Jack and I are partners and we both, yeah, it's all great. It's awesome. Hey, we're going to totally treat this thing like Robert Kiyosaki would say. We're going to pay for stuff pre-tax and it's going to be great and really get some owner fringe benefits out of this. And then we never talk about it again.
Yeah.
And then years later, we're not, Jack's pissed off because we're not making a lot of money. And he starts looking at the credit card statements and he sees my vacations on it, and he
Yeah.
sees my meals out with the family on it that were, hey, we're just, we're talking business, because wife's employed for the company. And he's like, you stole from me. And I'm like, no, we didn't. Like, we said we are going to do that. You're an idiot for not doing it. I always thought that you were, so like, it's just a
Yeah.
misaligned, like, in other words, I'm still doing something that is allowable under the tax code, assuming that I've crossed the T's and dotted the I's. But Jack's that I thought was okay, but Jack's now thinking that I stole from him because Jack wasn't aware that I was doing it to the extent that I was doing it. And at the same time, it technically probably was unfair because I was getting a benefit that Jack wasn't receiving. So that's usually how it shows up in partnerships. Is
Yeah.
that, one person's pissed off at the other. So anyway, appreciate you guys.
Yeah. Hey,
Jack.
great point, Adam. Thank you. Um, yeah, Jack, let's talk about that a little bit more. Man,
Yeah,
I experienced that too. I had two partners. One of them had a 740 IL, and his payment was about $900 a month, and I had a Saab 95 that my payment was like 350 a month. We were equal partners.
yeah, that comes up a lot in when you're in a mediation or negotiations, and then you put together the spreadsheet, which shows, oh, okay. So as Adam said, in his example, the company has been reimbursing him and paying for a lot of his stuff that may or may not be legitimately business related. But and then on my side of the ledger, there hasn't been this benefit. So then when you're talking about splitting up the company or one person buying out the other, now on my expectation, if Adam wants to buy me out, is that the purchase price is increased because he's already siphoned off part of his 50% of the equity through doing all these other activities. So
Yeah.
it puts you in a mindset of trying to get back to um, equality in what has been received through the work of both parties, and you're rebalancing that spreadsheet and adding in all those perks so that yeah, it's going to cost him a lot of money Or when if you're splitting it up, you're going to say, all right, well, that's fine. Here are the numbers, but we are going to offset all this other money that you've received or spent. And therefore, it just kind of organically increase the amount of money that is being given to me in compensation for that to get to the equilibrium. But I also wanted to momentarily talk about red flags. I did just a search, and I used Chat GPT. I normally would use Google and get it from a credible source. So I do have the source documents behind this, but just quickly, and it broke it out, or I had it break it out into, and it was behavioral, workplace activity, and access to systems. And so the red flags, and this is employee theft, behavioral red flags, living beyond their means. So sudden signs of wealth not explained by salary, reluctance to take vacation or time off for fear that someone else will discover irregularities while they're gone, unusually protective or secretive behavior, refusing help or supervision is related to that. Problems, gambling, addiction, financial pressure, like from a divorce or other things. Personality changes where they become evasive or irritable when you ask them about their job or job duties or how things are going, or to provide reports. Workplace activity red flags, frequent mistakes, and I use air quotes, in accounting records, things that seem to be corrected and after the fact, or when you have something that is automated or automatic, you go in and manually make that change into your records. Voided receipts, missing invoices, inconsistent time logs, unusual vendor activity, duplicative payments or inflated invoices, and unauthorized transactions or override of internal controls. And I would say I want to pause there, because override of internal controls, I'll give you an example here where for expenditures over a certain amount, I'm a member of our finance committee, so member kind of the management team. And so those requests come to me. It used to be manually on paper. Now it's all electronic. I get an email, I hit an approval button, and it's very easy for me to say, oh, I know that person has been here for a long time. Let me just hit approve. Now I may trust that person, but do I trust the person who actually submitted it to me? And shouldn't I verify? And there's been some times where I found some mistakes that the dollar number, and this was not purposeful, so it wasn't theft, but the dollar amount on the invoice didn't match what was being paid out. There was an overpayment. And the example was, it was an invoice for mediation and it has the total amount. Well, each of the parties pays 50%. So the request should have been for half of the amount of the invoice, and it just got missed. So it's things like that. But if there's more purposeful behavior regarding that, and so it'd be difficult in that scenario to steal. This is access and system red flags. So access to records outside of job responsibilities. So you see someone that is outside of their lane, looking into things and kind of interfering, essentially. Frequent logins outside normal work hours. That's interesting, because hopefully your systems log who is going in and out of your systems, not just for employee theft or things like that, but just knowing what's going on so you can try to prevent data breaches just by malicious people that are trying to get your data that have nothing to do with your business. Inventory shrinkage, I think we've talked about a little bit. And so those, I just wanted to bring, there's a lot longer list, but those are kind of like the top ones that I've seen and identified from this list as being more common, and then kind of impute that into some of the recommendations that we've made about what you should do. I totally agree with Adam that the credit card is one of the more dangerous aspects of theft and one of the easier ways to get away with it. And I'll give you again maybe just one more story, but had a client who was was periodically granting his new CFO permission to do certain things, and he was on the verge of issuing. They were changing banks, which was legit, but issuing new corporate credit cards to employees. Many of them already had corporate credit cards, but he wanted to empower them. They had low balances and that kind of thing. Well, you might be shocked to hear that there were some additional names on that list to be
Mm,
issued corporate credit cards of people who didn't exist. And so if this person had been permitted to do these things, and again, it was over a trusted period of time. Now, let's say that that actually happened. Well, okay, maybe you should know who's working for you and know kind of, that kind of thing. And again, you're trusting people within your organization. But what also happened was I received a phone call from a general counsel of a large company where this person came from and said, "Hey, by the way, see that on LinkedIn that this person is working for your client," which was interesting because he would have had to do some investigation to link me to this client, and he did it through public records. And said, "Just wanted to let you know." And
mhm.
I called up the client and he told me he was just about to say okay to the issuance of new credit cards and give this
Wow.
person access. So, crisis averted, but it was
Wow.
okay, just crazy that it all went down that way. But it just shows how easy it is to manipulate and get to, having these extra credit cards. And would anybody have noticed if there was a $200 charge here, $500 charge here that got paid in the normal course of the business? Probably, possibly not. But,
Yeah.
so, and Gary, I know you have plenty of war stories as well to tell personally and otherwise. So if you want to share
Well,
one of them.
it's just I mean, it's just disappointing, for me more than anything, it's the breach of trust. Like I'm very trusting and I still am, but I'm a lot more judicious about verification, which feels like distrusting, but it's like, hey, there is this trust but verify. I still choose to live uh, granting trust, but I am a lot more diligent about having some verification on the back end now. Otherwise, we just keep repeating history. But um, one thing that Adam mentioned that I thought, wow, this is really good because he was talking about culture and all that. And, you know, again, look at people that, commit heinous crimes against family members. Something's wrong with them, like something's wrong with them. It's not you. But one of the things that we've done um, to really try to help with our culture, like I don't believe in one time, once a year performance reviews. I think they just stink, but what we heard from our employees before we went into COVID was, especially our young, millennials and that sort of thing, they wanted more frequent mentorship. They wanted more frequent feedback. So I thought about that, and then I found this thing called Standout 2.0, and it's a book, and we've talked about it before, but for anybody that's new to it, it's a book by Marcus Buckingham, but there's an app that and ADP ended up buying it, but Marcus Buckingham had done Strengths Finder before, and then Gallup ended up buying this. But it's a very elegant app, and every week we check in. And it's not Big Brother. It's like it's an engagement pulse, and it's like, hey, what do you love doing? What were the things that you loved doing this week, and what were the things that you loathed doing? Thrive with her to me. Um, and like, is there something that you need? Like, what are your priorities for this week? It literally, if you're really diligent, and I am, 5 minutes, like a week. That's it. But then Adam sees mine and he has chance to comment, did Adam meet with you? Yes, no. Um, but when you care about somebody and you feel like you are cared for, I think it's just another level of safeguard versus I'm going to stick it to the man who I don't know, who I don't trust, who I am dubious about, and I think that, they're just a capitalist pig. There are people like that, and I've worked for them, but it still starts with you. And if we can create cultures that reinforce like you're heard, I remember working under Hugh McCall. He walked among the troops. You've talked about that, Jack. I didn't care that he flew around in his Gulfstream, and like I didn't care. I also knew that he had a beat up Ford Ranger that had "Don't mess with my gun" stickers, all over the back of it too, in addition to his other luxury vehicles. But I didn't care. But I knew that he cared about us and he cared about the city. And so I think it is a good point to like most people want people to do well. They just don't want to be taken advantage of. And if you feel like you're just taken for granted, then I think you are probably creating an environment where they don't trust you. But if it's your partner that's doing it, I'm glad that we actually talked a little bit about the inequalities of company reimbursements. Like you'd never think on a partnership when you get it launched or you've just come out of, you know, the abyss where typically is when I've been brought in. Oh, you don't think, oh, like all you're thinking about is survival and live to fight another day. But when you crest that hill and you actually start seeing bounty, that's when it gets like you find out a person's mettle when things are really bad and when things are really good. Those two extremes. And it's when things are really good. And if you have an entitlement mentality of a victimhood, like in because we can justify anything. That was the most scary thing for me, Jack, is when I discovered, oh gosh, I'm completely capable of doing the same thing this guy did because they started with these little insidious justifications, and then it just snowballed into this big avalanche.
And I know we're over time, but I just want to reiterate something that you said, which was, and add to it, which is you said mentorship, you said having feedback and guidance, but it's also the ability to give feedback to the employer, to the boss, and
Yeah.
feel free to do that. Because what that does is it takes away that sense of, okay, entitlement, that, okay, I'm going to be um, my retribution against the unfairness and my lack of voice is to do something different, which is theft, but possibly. But if you
Yeah.
foreclose that by saying, hey, you come to me with your problems, tell me what I feel like I'm undervalued, I feel like that I'm getting underpaid, you can try hopefully prevent some of those issues.
Yeah, I think that's really good. We will be putting this up on the BGW YouTube channel. Shoemaker has their own YouTube channel, so we'll get this up for anybody that had to dump off early. We'll look forward to having you in 2 weeks. In the meantime, happy Independence Day next week. Enjoy the 4th of July and time with family and friends, hopefully. And stay hydrated and cool. Happy 4th. Thank you, Papa
Thank
Joe.
you.
See you, Jack. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you.